Why, oh, why are the Indiana Pacers playing so poorly right now? Do they just stink? Can they recover from this? Which players need to rise to expectations? Many questions that Kevin Bowen from 107.5 The Fan's going to join us to answer today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Friday. Congrats. You made it through this week, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today I'm in a winter hat because I came in from working on my deck to record this, and I'll go right back outside to do it. So I am freezing cold, and Kevin Bowen's going to get me warm with some hot takes today. Not really, not any hot takes, but we're going to talk about the Pacers, and they're not playing well at all. They're 9-14. Why? What is going on? Why is this team that many thought could be better than last year playing so much worse? And what can they do about it? Can they recover from this? Factors involved. Where this could go next, Kevin, is the best. Love having him on to get his insights as we dive into a team that is currently, as of me talking for this intro, bottom 10 in both offense and defense. What needs to happen? What needs to be fixed? Does this team just stink? We'll get to all of it today with Kevin. Let's just get right to it. Very rare that I have a conversation with this man after 9 in the morning, but today we will make an exception here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. It's Kevin Bowen. You all know him from the morning show over at 107.5 The Fan. Kevin, how are you? Are you excited to talk some basketball instead of some football for once? Notre Dame looks good. Colts looking better, but the Pacers do not.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. When you texted me yesterday and asked me to come on, I was met with gosh, because I got no answer. So, that's not a ringing endorsement for the next 20 minutes or so, but I guess we'll try to make sense of it.
You know who else has no answers? Is them, because if they had the answers, they would say what they think they are or show some progress addressing them. It's gotten to a weird point, right? Because I kind of feel like with how injured they were and how difficult their first 13 games were, it was pretty easy to kind of say, well, if this changes or that changes or whatever for a while, everyone said, well, they could turn a corner, right? There were a lot of reasonable reasons to think it could happen. And now with this 4-game losing streak, winning only 3 of their last 10, and all 3 of those wins extremely uninspiring, and a lot of those losses of the blowout variety, there's the question everybody's asking is what you tweeted last night. Do they just kind of stink? And if that answer is yes, how do they stop? So one, open-ended, do you think that they stink? And if so, why do you think that's the case, and how do they get out of it? Because I have my own opinions on this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly right now they stink. I mean,
yes.
I thought a stat that you tweeted out that was really good from last night, it was really damning, is the margin within these games.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like they are super competitive throughout 48 minutes. I mean, it's been ugly for long stretches. The second quarter, obviously last night, I mean, I would argue the first quarter was so weird. No turnovers and you score 17 points. I mean, how often do you see that in the NBA? So I would start there. They stink. And when they've been healthy, you know, they also had question marks then. I mean, they got some good injury breaks early in the season before, you know, Nembhard and Nesmith. And, you know, I to have your big 3 healthy throughout the year too. I mean, how many teams would sign up for that? I mean, Haliburton, Mathurin, and Siakam have been healthy for every single game. So, yes, current iteration, December 5th, you know, as we talk right now, yeah, they do. Where are reasons for hope? I guess Andrew Nembhard extended minutes coming up, and, you know, the return of Aaron Nesmith. I mean, that's quite the pedestal to put those players on. I will say I am curious, what will the schedule break do for them in the next 10 to 15 days? And again, this might be a little glass half full of me, but I recall having Rick Carlisle on our morning show the Tuesday after they gave up 151 to the Clippers last December. And it was 4 straight losses. They had given up a ton of points in each of those 4 games. And you've never seen a man so excited to get on the practice floor. And, you know, when's the last time the Pacers have had, you know, real days of practice?
None.
You know, part of that's just life in the NBA to a degree, but still.
Well, their schedule's jank because of Paris, right? They play so often this year. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Well, it is going to lighten up. I mean, there's a stretch upcoming
4 days off.
Yeah, and if you extend it before the Western break, I want to say it's like 2 games in an 11-day stretch. So, I mean, again, it's glass half full, but certainly they need to hash things out from a meeting room, film room, on floor, off floor. I mean, all those areas need to be touched. So again, it's probably a little glass half fully, but that is a thought that I do have.
Yeah, I'll give 2 of those in a second. I don't want to start with those because they stink right now, and that
Right.
needs to be the headliner, right? And here's what I've been saying when people ask me, why do they stink? Like, the concept of the Pacers this year was, okay, bring back the same team, hope that last year's defense from the end of the year, which wasn't good, but was like good enough, right? 22nd-ish, sticks for a whole year instead of part of the year. And then their offense is still amazing, right? So the whole year of better defense, even if it's still bad, it's just better. And great offense leads to good product. And the defense is 6th worst, which actually is better than this time last year. And the numbers are better last year, even though it doesn't feel like it. The problem with their plan is, instead of a top 3 offense, they're currently bottom 10. They're 21st in offense. Like, how? I can't even like fathom that. And they said after preseason and at times throughout the season, oh, we feel disconnected as a team, right? And sometimes when you're playing bad, that just sounds like not a nonsense word, but just kind of like, okay, you're playing bad, and like that is what it feels like. But then you watch them have these last 2 games where they're turning it over like absurdly often, and in just the most random, like, what was that pass? What were you looking? It does feel like they're actually disconnected, which is weird for a team that's like, hey, continuity is going to be our thing this year. And I get that they've been so hurt that it hasn't really mattered that they have continuity, but that is what is so goofy about this to me, and why they are bad is because they cannot score. And so, yeah, I think everybody expected their defense would be about this level, but they can't outscore teams to make it a thing. 4 times under 100 this year. They just gave up 99. Last year, they would win that game by 20, at least 15, and they lost by 9. Like, it's so weird to see them this bad on offense, especially because of what you said. Even though they've been really banged up, and it is guys who are like identity-setting players, Haliburton, Siakam, and Mathurin have played every game. And so you'd expect them to be, at worst, 10th to 15th offensively with what they've had. And instead, they've been bad to some nights, just lost 2 nights in a row where they look horrible in first halves. They have a pocket of every game where they can't score or get a stop. And then they're down, like you said, 20-something points. So they stink. They just do, right? It's very rare that a team exclusively trying to win, like very few development side projects, I guess you could say Jarris Walker is 9-14, right? The only 2 times that I could think of since I've been truly like every game, watch them all, let's write stuff, but they've been that bad in a stretch they were trying was the end of the season that Depot got hurt in 18-19. They went 9-14 to end that one. And okay, I get why they went 9-14 that time. And then the first 23 games of Carlisle's first season, which felt different because that team was coming off of the Bjorken year where they were under 500 and not very good. And this time they were supposed to be good after a good season last year. So it hits really hard in this reality. Now, you just said 2 things that I think are true. The injury part of this is a thing. They'll recover eventually. Their schedule's been and will continue to be, once they start the West Road trip again, very condensed. And they will have in a break to recover and practice. And I used to think that meant nothing until this Fever season, when the Fever practiced and were like 10 times better all of a sudden in early June. Maybe that will actually help them, because let's stress you referenced last year. I think they lost 6-7, changed their starting lineup after Christmas, and then won like 6 in a row. Right. And then we're looking awesome before Haliburton got hurt against the Celtics. That did happen, right? Perhaps, I'm not saying it will, perhaps that happens again. And the other part of the practice and health conundrum would be their offense, even though it's been so bad. I think that there's a stretch every game, which is part of what makes their low point so baffling to me. There's a stretch every game. Memphis, 45 in the first quarter. Third quarter in Brooklyn, 35. Easy points, no turnovers. Everyone's clicking. In Toronto, their comeback that was 2 points short of being an actual comeback, where I'm like, yeah, there it is. Like, they can do it. They just don't for a full game for whatever million reasons there are. So if it's a consistency thing, I'm not saying they'll turn it around and be a good team, but they'll be better than this. So I think there are reasons to say they'll be better than this current team that just right now they stink, right? But that doesn't matter because they stink right now, and they're lucky the East also stinks.
Yeah, I going to the offensive point, because again, it's so confusing to me as well. I go back to when Rick Carlisle, I thought, rather organically brought it up, preseason, about the physicality emphasis that they felt from that coaches meeting. And I remember getting done with that interview with him and thought, man, he really harped on that. Like, that clearly is something on his mind. And I kind of turned it clearly in the wrong direction. I kind of said, well, this will be good for the Pacers defense. Now they can just hack and hack and hack, and they won't call anything. Like, they don't guard to begin with. So now at least they'll get away with that. Defending without fouling. That's been such a great phrase, or a popular phrase that, unfortunately Carlisle's had to use a lot here in the last, couple of years. And now I thought, well, they now won't call those fouls. So they'll be good. And clearly that is impacting them to a degree on the offensive end of the floor. I said something this morning that I think sounds a bit stupid, but I think you can maybe hear it out, Tony, and it's this. I do think if you ranked the 30 NBA teams on just overall athleticism and physicality, I don't think the Pacers would rank very high at all. I think they're a very skilled individually. I mean, I think Siakam is one of the more gifted offensive players, from a 6'9" post presence, however you want to describe him, face up guy, et cetera, that is out there. Mathurin is a very skilled offensive player. Obviously, Haliburton is a very gifted offensive player. And sure, guys like Toppin, are very athletic, but I just don't think they're a team built on brute physicality and athleticism. And whether you want to look at what Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett, did to you the other night, or just, Brooklyn throwing guys that, are just, certainly not Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett, but 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" guys at you. And you struggle with that because their overall length and physicality just wears on you. How many times last night did you see a Pacer player drive and they just lose it? Or, they're looking for the whistle and they don't get it. Mathurin probably being the biggest culprit. Last night I thought was one of his worst offensive games of the year, certainly.
Yep.
So, I'm curious how much of that is weighing on him. And some might chalk that up as an excuse, but, Carlisle mentioned it preseason. And I felt clearly that was weighing on him then. And I think we've seen some of that play out. And then lastly, I would just say, general flow to this offense, I do think, and you've brought this up a lot, Nembhard and Nesmith can be connectors. I think the ball does stick with Mathurin and Siakam. And again, at times that can bail you out. That can be, a great offensive, play, but it sticks. And so you just generally lose your globetrottery look that this team had for many, many stretches last season. So I summarize all of it to say, I don't know what's the easiest fix out of all of that. But I go back to what I said to stay with you at the start, 2 games in 11 days. If you can't get it figured out then certainly as the schedule stiffens up to end December, you're going to have some hard, honest conversations come trade deadline time.
2 of their 9 wins were just Mathurin go crazy against the Knicks or Siakam go crazy against the Celtics, right? Because that's what their offense has kind of required without that pace and pop and flow that you just described. And that's fine. Those guys are good at that, right? Like it's part of what makes them a good player. And the hope has been blend Ben Mathurin with what the Pacers do or vice versa. It's just hard to do that, especially when they're so banged up that it's even a different lineup than they expected to have to fit that stuff into. And I do agree the physicality element's a big part of this. Like driving into 2 guys, you don't get that bailout call anymore. How many times has Haliburton chucked up a floater because he's trying to fake that foul? And to his credit, he makes enough of those that it's not like a stupid play. But I was like, oh, he just hunted for that. And
he had at least 3 or 4 last night against Brooklyn.
Yeah. He hunts for it and just burps up a 15-footer.
Yeah.
He makes like 45% of them, so it's okay. But yeah, it's certainly a change part of the NBA. And you can go back even farther, right? Like you've been a part of these conversations with Rick in Summer League where he's talking about what Jarris needs to become for them. And that's like all his points. Hit hard, physicality, bang, rebound, force. And Jarris has been better at some of that stuff this year, but just like that element of what they're focusing on with certain young players in their developments, because the league's trending that way, and they need them to be good at those things to be a better team. And some guys have had that some nights, right? But not all the time. And when they play as a unit to finesse, like, yeah, it works great when you're, one of the best offensive teams of all time. It does not work so great when you are 5th to last in 3-point attempts and can't stop anybody. And if you get to the rim, you're lucky some games. Like it just hasn't been there. And it's kind of everybody, right? I kind of want to go through an expectations versus reality thing to end this, but all these points are coming together for just like with what the NBA is and what the Pacers are. We nailed the answer to the question right now. Yes, they just stink, which is so weird because this stretch they're in right now, really through that 2 games in 11 days you talked about, was supposed to be their easy time to climb over 500. Now they have to win their next 4 to be 500 when it gets tough again. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC.
Yeah, I think last week they had the 4 straight at home, right? They went 3-1 in those, but and I do this quite often in my job, I compare things to the Colts. It's kind of how I feel about the Colts and beating the Patriots and the Jets by 1 point. I mean, those are their only wins over the last month and a half. Obviously, wins are important for both organizations right now, but I don't think you slide the banners over at Lucas Oil Stadium and think something's going to change significantly, when they start playing better teams. The Pacers won those games at home last week, 3-1, but you don't walk away from any of them thinking that was it. And so now look at this week. Again, on paper, here you're playing 4 straight road games against, if you take out Memphis, these 4, all of them outside of the Eastern Conference playoff picture. And, Brooklyn or Toronto the other night, I mean, they're still missing a couple guys that, in Emmanuel Quickly and Grady Dick. I don't know if that's equivalent to Aaron Nesmith or not, or Ben Shepherd, but still, it's not like, they were you were in a huge injury disadvantage in that game. And obviously you've lost the first 2, and we'll see what happens with Chicago coming up. So that's what I think is just maddening about it, because the schedule's about to get tougher. You got the West Coast trip coming up. You've got those back-to-backs with Boston. And then, once the calendar turns to January, that's when all that trade stuff just starts rising. And it is hard to block out. You can, it's not a big front burner topic right now, but as soon as that calendar gets to January, I think it's 2 months from today. I want to say it's February 6th is when that comes out. So, I'm at such a loss, and lineup changes and, this guy and that guy, none of it makes great sense to me. Last night we saw there are stretches there where McConnell was in the game, and hell, Furphy was in there during one of your better stretches.
Oh, man. This was one of my favorite notes of the season, because I have been talking so much about if they have McConnell, Siakam on the floor, it doesn't matter who the other 3 guys are. They've been good. They really tested that theory when it was those 2 with Freeman, Furphy, and Jarris Walker. It did not work.
Yeah, that was one of those lineups in the second quarter, right? Yeah. I mean, it was like I am watching last night. I'm like, wow, here we. I mean, first off, Furphy got the start.
It was awesome.
You're right. He got the start in the third quarter, and I mean that was like a rub my eyes moment. Like, am I seeing things right now? And then once it happened, I did the Alonzo Mourning gif, and I was kind of like, oh yeah. I guess that kind of makes sense. Like, this is the sad reality of where they're at. And frankly, and again, what I've thought of Mathurin and what I think of him. I thought Carlisle actually had the Mathurin leash a little longer last night than he,
they have to. They don't have other wings.
Right, exactly. They're in a situation right now where they just have no choices. So again, to me, it is scratch, claw, fight your way, which they're just not built like that. I go back to kind of that physical athleticism nature. They just don't get a lot of easy buckets that way, where they can just out-athlete, out-length, out-whatever, teams. They are a finesse bunch, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Sure, McConnell's diving for loose balls, and they play hard. And, some of those guys are kind of on the bench, guys that do play hard in terms of Shepherd and Nesmith. But when they face some of these teams, and the physicality and the length is such a huge, I think, reason for the NBA kind of evolving how it has this season, the Pacers are just not one of those teams.
I agree. And it's weird because you don't like being directly a physical team isn't great either. You need the right balance, and they don't have it. And trade chatter will be really weird for them. I actually think I'm going to start talking about it much sooner, because they need a backup center like now, possibly. And if they don't think Moses Brown can do it, which they still have turned to Toppin more, they've been going with Freeman at the 4. Like, with absolutely no offense to Moses Brown, he was great in their win over the Wizards. The fact that they're willing to go with a Freeman and someone else front court is very telling to me about what they're thinking about with his minutes. So they're going to have, I don't know about a big trade really early in the season, like right away in 10 days or 9 days or whenever this comes out. But with backup center, it wouldn't surprise me if they thought about it extremely soon, especially because they could potentially, if they trade Wiseman or Jackson, clear some money in the process. In terms of real trades, it's going to be they need to have a point in their head where they're like, okay, if we're this bad still by whatever date, we have to do something. And it's weird because it's very rare that a team that is in their spot that already gave up stuff for really good players, like, we have to do this again now. So
and they have their first rounder this year. The last one for the Siakam deal is next year. Is that correct?
that is true, but the NBA rule is, remember, they can't trade picks in consecutive years. So they can't trade their 25 first or their 27 first.
Got it. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow, that
so
just complicates things further.
yeah, so that's why I almost think like it's either young guys or, I mean, do you really want to push in all your chips to be good this specific year? How far back do you get where you're like, well, we're not even good enough to do that, right? So there is going to be a weird inflection point, presumably in January, where they have to like make these weird decisions, and they had to do that in the year they traded for Tyrese Haliburton when they started 9-14 when they were trying to be good and couldn't do it. So that's just kind of reality. Let me turn this question out of the way about this team not being very good, Kevin. Has a single player on the team, actually, that's not true. I think two have. How many players on the team to you have met or exceeded your expectations for them for this season? And that's a very big question because to me, Siakam went over. He's been awesome. These last two games have actually been two of his worst. I don't want recency bias to creep into people's minds. He's been awesome. I think Mathurin's been above most, at least for me. I know you're the statue Ben Mathurin guy, but he's been great to me. A lot of this year has done a good job, at least improving in some ways, even with some hiccupy moments. It's hard for me to say anyone else has exceeded expectations. A few guys, I guess you could say, have met them. And that was kind of the theory of a run it back team is young guys getting better or like continuity making these guys look better. And that hasn't happened at all. It's kind of been the opposite in a lot of cases, which has been, to me, another part of them being 9-13.
Yeah, boy, when you started to go down the list, I mean, it's pretty sad that I went to Furphy and Quentin Jackson.
Quentin Jackson, yes, also has exceeded expectations.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
But again, I mean, what a sad state that like that's where I'm going. Yeah, I really can't make a case. I've been disappointed with Walker, and I'm trying to like kind of keep it into perspective a little bit of like, all right, yes, he's a top 10 pick, but I mean, these are the first real NBA minutes that he's getting. But man, what a golden opportunity he's getting right now, and what a needed opportunity, frankly, he's getting right now. And you know, Rick spoke with us on Tuesday about how he kind of had a long talk with Jaros the other day and felt like, you know, he had seen some steps in the right direction. Well, again, and this is recency bias, but I didn't think Toronto and Brooklyn, we really saw that from
I agree.
him.
And the two games right before that, he was great. And then those two right back to what he kind of looked like before.
Right.
That. Yeah.
So again, I'm trying to keep things into perspective a little bit, given his age and just given this the first real time we've seen him. But boy, he's just so needed right now. So yeah, I mean, you laid it out accurately. You know, I guess if you're grasping for stuff, I mean, Haliburton's road splits certainly this week have been a little better. Obviously, I know last night wasn't great. Frankly, it wasn't great for anyone, but you know, it hasn't been as just mad anti as it's looked at times for him on the road. So, yeah, it's just so disappointing that like I go from, you know, whatever you said, Siakam and Mathurin, and then you got to go all the way down to guys that you expected again to be not playing for you really at all.
One more break here, guys. We got to talk about the good people over at FanDuel. You can get ready to tackle the NFL action, jump into the NBA season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. How about that? The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NBA and NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of a game, you know what's coming. You want to wager on it. You can check out the latest stats from the action. You can view live play-by-play and so much more. So you can be as informed as possible to act on your hunches and all that information on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Yeah, and I can't really, that's kind of why it's so hard to answer the like, why do they stink question? Because part of what I would say to everybody before the season is the reason I think it makes sense for a team like the Pacers to run it back is Haliburton's 24, Nembhard's 20, whatever they are. Nembhard's on his first contract. Nesmith just finished his first contract. Toppin just finished his first contract. Who am I missing? Mathurin just is still on his first contract. Jackson entering the season on his first deal. all these guys are young and inexperienced. Like the theory is, even if two of those guys I just said get better from last year because they're young and inexperienced, then they're a better team. And like none of them have, if not the opposite. And I suppose that's always possible. Is like players get worse or play worse, but this is 23 games, the fourth of a season of them not showing progress yet in a meaningful way. Walker too, it's just really goofy in that way. And I could not foresee that, right? That's why I thought running it back actually made sense. Like then you really figure out who you are and what you need. And instead it's like, what are we? Right. So it's really challenging that they've had that be the case where one of the guys exceeding, it's great that it's Mathurin and he's young and good. And the other one's their 30-year-old rock solid vet who like they already would hope that this is what he could be. And he is. So that's kind of hard to go somewhere from. Because they don't even know what they are. How do you go forward from there?
Yeah, I was I kind of forget if you and I talked in the offseason. I assume that we did on here. I know we certainly had you on our show, but I was a little more of like, hey, you listen to calls on Andrew Nembhard. You like I got run it back. I understood it, but I was like, wait a minute, don't just go in the first day of the offseason and say, we're running it back, and then say, hey, let's all go over to, whatever, the Eagle and celebrate. And that's what we're going to do. And, we aren't even going to, throw out plan A's, B's, C's, D's, etc. So, because, with the Siakam, trade and deal, with the Nembhard deal, and obviously the Nembhard deal, on paper, it still looks great. You are just naturally hamstrung to what now the flexibility of the Kevin Pritchard word he loved that you have. But I got it. Like I could listen to it and say, wait a minute, what if, Mathurin comes back, and what if he listens to all of the defensive talk and what, won for us in the playoffs? And, you forget you got a top 10 pick at a wing position in Jarris Walker that certainly can show you something. So again, as much as I said, wait a minute, let's like actually, listen to some things, or at least look into things. I understood where they were coming from when they ran it back. And I thought my question was more of on the defensive end of like, wait a minute, we've talked defense and rebounding for all these years. Where's running it back getting you better there? I mean, it's all on Walker, because I don't think Mathurin's ever going to be anything of super reliability on that end of the floor. But here we are 24 games into it, and it's the offense that, I mean, there are issues on both ends, but, defensively, there's a level of acceptance I feel like we all have come to. Offensively, it's so foreign, and it's just, you're just not built for it at all. To your point that you brought up earlier when you listed the numbers defensively and offensively, you can't survive with where you're at from an offensive standpoint.
They're lucky to have 9 wins, I think.
Yeah. And again, the stat that you brought up of just these massive holes that they're in during games of, they just can't get out of these ruts. And again, last night you point to the second quarter and it's boom, it's a dozen turnovers. Well, what about the first quarter when you didn't turn the ball over? I mean, 17 points in a quarter for the NBA in 2024. I mean, even in a season where we've seen a little bit less scoring around the league, that is still a shocking number. So, yeah, it is just so head scratching. And I think you hear Carlisle post game, or even with us, like, I think he's at a bit of a loss. I mean, he to me is because we've seen him play bad cop and good cop at various points throughout his coaching tenure, and he's not afraid to play bad cop. He's gone good cop after these last 2 games, I think, in the post game more than I thought he would. And I think that's him a little bit of like, boy, is it more mental? Do I need to play that role? And then whatever, behind the scenes, play a different role. It's just, it's very interesting to me how he's handled it. And obviously it's a critical juncture for him upcoming here with that extra practice time that they're going to get.
Fans hate the way he like kind of generically answers stuff sometimes, but when it's weird like this, that is the right answer sometimes. It's just like, we've got to be better, and it's bad, and we hope there's progress, right? Like, I think he's telling the truth, even though it hits fans wrong. Last question for you generically. We've kind of run through the reasons why. Do you think they actually can recover from this, or do you think they're going to be about this group for the next 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, I do. If you're going to, whatever, what are they? Not even a third of the way through the season. So just from a pure quantity of game standpoint, that's going to be there. I do think the returns of Nembhard and Nesmith will help things. Now, granted, what happens when Siakam's out for 2 weeks, or, Mathurin's out for 2 weeks, or Haliburton? Again, they've avoided those injuries just yet. Is that going to be a given moving forward? And obviously, when you look at the East right now, if you have a good 10-day stretch, you're on the right side of the play-in all of a sudden. I don't know exactly where they're at in the standings. I think they're kind of in the back.
They're like 2 wins from 8 right now.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
So that's where I'm like, okay, we don't need to be DEFCON panicky, but I mean, you're going to have to win games that on paper right now, there's no chance they're going to win. Like last night, I was stunned they were favored over Brooklyn. I could not believe it. But like at some point, you need to be favored over Brooklyn and you need to beat Brooklyn. And then you're going to have to go out west. Then, hey, if you get 1 out west, it's a good trip. No. You're going to have to start to get 2 out west. And like, those games, you're going to have to start to turn around. So I wish I could give you, massive reasons why I'm confident in a turnaround. Again, not overly confident, but I just can't imagine it continuing. The one worry is just the adjustment to the physicality. And like, I don't have a good answer for that because I don't think they're wired personnel wise to handle that very, very well. So, is that going to take something at the deadline? And, the thing about the NBA deadline is it's so late in the year. I mean, if you don't have it somewhat figured out by February 6th, I don't know what's going to happen in 2 months that all of a sudden you're going to, with the All-Star break after that you're going to get it figured out.
They've played 23. Their next 23 will be all the rest of their games in December and January. If they go 14-9, which would be a pretty good 23 games, given that they play, let me just read some of these. At Phoenix, at Golden State versus OKC, at Boston twice, at Miami versus Phoenix versus Golden State, at Cleveland versus Cleveland, all in the next 23. If they go 14-9 in that stretch, they'll be 500 on February 1st. Like
that's crazy.
That's where they're at.
That's crazy.
I think they can play better than this because they show flashes every game where they do, but they have to now, right now. They are not at a time of grace period.
Because when the schedule came out, Tony, I thought this stretch they're about to enter here in about 10 days. I thought that was their hardest stretch in the schedule.
Easily,
I thought
totally.
You had the heavy home slate early on.
December 19th through December 2nd. I still have it highlighted a certain color on my sheet. Yep.
Yeah. And then right now, again, last week you had the 4 straight at home, and then this week you've got these 4 teams that are outside of the Eastern Conference playoff picture. So, it just squandered opportunities with a team that, had the continuity in the offseason, unlike some of these other teams. They were healthy entering the start of the season. That's what it's weird because, in the preseason, some of these red flags were there. And I remember being like,
preseason?
Right. Am I stupid to pay attention to these preseason red flags? Like, have I ever cared about the Pacers preseason like this? Or just because they have a year with high expectations that I now care about it? But now here we are 20 some games into it, and those red flags have come to fruition kind of.
Yeah, I got to think about preseason differently. Whatever. They made the conference finals. They don't care about these games. Yikes. Maybe they should have. Kevin, this was great. Unlike the Pacers right now, this was very fun and interesting and full of potentially answers to the questions people have been asking. You cover every Indiana team over at your place of employment, which is where can people find you covering all of those things?
107.5 The Fan. It's the Pacers affiliate here in town, 7 to 10 a.m. morning show. So you can check us out. And Tony, as always, in Pacers Nation, we are very grateful to have your knowledge. So thank you, sir.
Kevin wakes up at a time that I don't think is real every day to give you guys the information that you need and still grinds the Colts coverage. So much respect. Thank you for the time. Everybody back tomorrow talking Pacers Bulls. I'll be up there to watch 2 of the worst defensive teams in the NBA try to get back on track. Thanks for listening. See you soon.